for London in the EdTech Demonstrators programme. I'm really pleased that you've been able to make it this afternoon and take time out of your busy days and weeks during these quite unusual times. Today we've got a great session and a hotly discussed topic of CPD, and yeah, we've got a fantastic panel of speakers from some of the demonstrators around the country. I just thought as a point of note that I saw yesterday one of the EdTech scene's most sort of reverent commentators, Bob Harrison, discussing on Twitter about how there's very much a big issue when it comes to teachers and a lack of CPD. So this is what we're going to drill down on today, and sort of explore that topic. Like, is there an issue, and what are those issues, and maybe what are we doing to sort of address them? But without further ado, I'd like to introduce colleagues first. So guys, maybe I can ask Matt to start. Could you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about your involvement?
Thanks, Chris. Yes, so my name's Matt Beck and I work at the Heart of Worcestershire College. Got a mixed kind of job role. So I am a blended learning team leader that works for the Blended Learning Consortium. So I'm a leader of that team over there, and I'm also an advanced quality practitioner for digital skills across the college as well. Been doing both roles for quite a bit of time. So a teacher first, kind of with part of a teacher hat on, yeah, taught lots of mixed levels and lots of mixed abilities. So yeah, using a range of different technologies to kind of engage and support students. The latter, really, my kind of main responsibility at the moment is kind of in-house CPD as part of my AQP role for staff and students, and also working quite closely on the EdTech demonstrator programme, which is a brilliant kind of opportunity to share our experience and kind of tips and tricks around what's capable across digital technologies, really. We've been in support of 13 schools and colleges now since the programme started, all really successful and all really kind of great collaborative working relationships created from that. So yeah, really happy to be part of this, and yeah, nice to meet you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Matt. Stephen, why don't I ask you to sort of introduce yourself as well, please?
Yeah, hi, my name's Stephen Cooper. I am the EdTech lead at Balcarres and National Star. So Balcarres is a comprehensive school in Cheltenham, got about 1,500 students, including our sixth form here. National Star is an SEND specialising college in Cheltenham as well. So we've kind of created a consortium, which I think is one of the reasons why a lot of the people coming to us for support are looking for that kind of SEND spin on what can be done. But it's also allowed us to really sort of burrow a niche there and provide some SEND support to any school that's coming to us looking for support as well. In terms of my background, I've been here for 2 years now. It probably was my role before that got me into the role I am now. I was teaching in a school in Nottinghamshire for around 10 years. During that time, I was leading up the CPD in that school. Also, because of my technical background, I got roles including transferring from outgoing VLE platforms into that school using a Google Classroom system. I've been part of the team here as well that have driven our change from, again, an outgoing VLE system to a Microsoft Teams system here. So I think that's sort of me and my centres in a nutshell, I suppose.
Yeah, thanks very much, Stephen. And then last but not least, can I ask Phil to chip in and introduce himself?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. My name's Phil. I'm from Oldham Sixth Form College, and I've been here for roughly about 3.5 years, with my main role centering around students. It's progressed to an advanced practitioner role, which is helping mainly staff and their CPD. I've been doing the role for, in its entirety, about 17 years, doing almost identical roles at a different college. The CPD side of it has taken off quite heavily over the past, as you can imagine, the past 9 months, with a lot of staff. I wouldn't say they were being left behind, but they suddenly had a lot of panic that they didn't work up to speed with a lot of the digital skills. So my role has then moved on to taking staff from mainly an analog system up to a digital platform. And with that, we went to a Google college roughly about 18 months ago. And part of my role was to introduce Google as both the classroom delivery system and the new VLE system that we're going to be using going forward, using Google Sites and Classroom as its main platform. That's really me in a nutshell. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. Now, I think just before we kick off, I'd also just like to address the white elephant in the room, that and I should apologise to all of our audience, that there is a distinct lack of diversity on this panel today, and the only reason for that is one of our colleagues, Lindsay Kyle, who's keen to join us. Her school's gone down with a COVID outbreak, so she's attending to students and staff sort of needs, and is really needed in school. So hopefully that's not going to diminish the quality of content and discussion today. But let's kick off. So, you know, I'm picking up on a couple of things that actually Phil said, that there's, you know, that teachers were feeling overwhelmed. You know, these sort of concepts of fear, anxiety and inertia seems to sort of ring quite true, I think, at the moment. And yet it does feel like the face of CPD for teachers has kind of changed forever now, maybe. I just wondered whether, you know, what the panel's thoughts are on this idea that perhaps CPD has changed forever. Is it more flexible? Is it more efficient, given that, you know, we don't need to have to rock up at a training venue these days and take an entire day out of school or college to be able to receive this training? Let me know what you think. How do you sort of see the landscape and how it's changed at the moment? Anybody can jump in, please.
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in first, Chris. Yeah, I think I totally agree that it has changed. I mean, I've been doing my AQP role for just over 2 years, and yeah, we've got a kind of a multi-site setup. So we've got 5 campuses across the county, really. So yeah, personally, it's difficult to get to every single campus at the same time prior to COVID, and that's kind of normally how we would have delivered our staff CPD. Yeah, it has its advantages. I think in regards to now I can cover a lot more people and train a lot more people. But I also think the danger of that is some staff that aren't as confident in some of the technologies actually prefer to have a more face-to-face show and tell kind of situation. And I think that that's what I'm quite conscious of as and working with a college, that we do have those members of staff that do shy away and do kind of not want to sign themselves up to these digital training sessions because they're, you know, unconfident. And I think that those are the people really that I'm quite mindful of. So yeah, I think it has its pluses and negatives, really. I think yes, we can deliver great training remotely now. We've got the facility to be able to do that and cover a lot more places, but it's still worth considering those people that don't want to put themselves in a large online training room because they haven't got the confidence to. So yeah, it has to be a little bit mixed, I would say.
And what about Phil or Stephen? Have you got some views on that, or want to expand?
Yeah. I mean, it's been something that I've been sort of, even before the lockdown things, I've had quite strong views on this even before that. And I think CPD was due for a change, because I think there was, if you mention CPD to most staff, there's still this sort of vision that people get of, you all sort of marched into the hall, you sat down, and you kind of get somebody who's a supposed kind of expert in whatever it might be, and they say, right, this is what you're meant to do, this is what you're all doing wrong, this is how to improve and get better. And I just don't think that's really fit for purpose. I think if you did that sort of style in a classroom and expected students to engage with that, I think, you know, that wouldn't be acceptable. So I think CPD should be differentiated, and I think this is an opportunity for that. And I think it's an opportunity to create sort of banks of resources that staff can tap into as and when they need to, depending upon their needs. Because you will have some staff who are dead technical if we're trying to train people up on new platforms or whatever it might be, that don't need a lot of that initial training, but then you need some that have very, very different needs. And I think it is an opportunity to start doing that, that I hope schools start taking on more.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit of a challenge, isn't it? Like how do you best identify and differentiate those needs when you've just got a screen that is the barrier between you and the trainer, right? I guess that's a real challenge and something that maybe isn't quite figured out yet. Phil, what's sort of your perspective on things?
I can agree on. I can see the benefits certainly of remote teaching and remote CPD, but I had an example there where a tutor came in and she appreciated the physical that I could show and click buttons and implement something that she can't necessarily see over a screen.
Mm-hmm.
So while the remote part of it, you can reach more people, there is still, I feel, especially for people who are more analog in the way that they teach and learn, that you could go into a room and show them and click the button. Because what I've found a lot of times is people do know what they're doing, but they are quite scared that if they press a button, they are going to break something. Yeah. And it's that reassurance that if you press this, it's not going to explode. It will still work. And even if you do something wrong, you can back out of it.
Yeah, I think that's sort of common practice with quite a few people of sort of our age, maybe a little bit older, perhaps. There is this kind of fear that you're about to break something, and if you click the wrong thing, it's going to explode, and perhaps you're going to maybe be even less confident about trying a new approach as well. Matt, I'm going to come back to sort of you around the Blended Learning Consortium particularly, right? So I was somewhat involved, at an arm's length distance quite many moons ago around Blended Learning Essentials and the sort of setup of that platform to train teachers. See, that seemed to be like one of the first en masse digital CPD offers that the UK had sort of lent into. And now we've got things like the Demonstrators program, which is more sort of one-to-one and sort of practical and applied learning approaches. I guess what I'm trying to understand now is what do you see as being some of the differences between maybe how CPD was being delivered even a year, 2 years ago, and how the sort of needs have sort of changed over the course of maybe the last sort of 6 to 12 months? And, what do we think we could be doing better in terms of how that CPD is being delivered? So this is, again, going to come to the whole panel, but yeah, how have things changed recently? We've obviously in the advent of digital tools, and what haven't we quite got right yet?
It's a difficult one. I think that the CPD trainers and people that do offer CPD are really brilliant at what they do, and I think that it's not so much what's changed. I think it's how we now engage and interact those staff in a different way. I think that some of the examples that I've done with large sort of training sessions, and kind of going back to what Phil was saying about how you can kind of differentiate those people in a room, is you kind of use the same kind of things you would in a talk lesson with students, and use those kind of interactive tools to kind of gauge an understanding of what you're about to deliver. We use Teams quite a lot at Howe College, and using kind of things like a quick poll 10 minutes before the session, or a quick Microsoft form a day before the session, and kind of differentiating who is working at what level really helps you then kind of design a more bespoke training session, I feel. I think in regards to kind of blended learning and how we're offering that now, it's really important that we don't lose sight of that actual taught, that pedagogy kind of side of things, and how we don't just put an online resource for someone to kind of work through. We need to make sure that we kind of close that loop and use the the traditional teaching tools and techniques that we were taught to make it a more of a fuller kind of lesson. And I think that from my experience, and I'm sure colleagues, I'm not going to mention any names, but colleagues, you know, that I worked with just flooded the kind of market with resources, and kind of didn't really think about how that links to the criteria or links to the kind of, you know, the objectives of what they're trying to set out. And I think that, you know, the same applies in a kind of CPD lesson. You know, I try to run my taught CPD sessions in that way. You know, I set those objectives that by the end of this session you will be able to, and I think that that's key to really keeping it consistent. So yeah, it's changed platform, but I'm always quite an advocate of selling it in a way that the bare bones doesn't have to change. I think that should stay the same, really.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? And Phil, I'm going to come to you next, because I mean, what we know about the FE space and adult vocational learning in any case is that applied learning is predominantly the best way to deliver that training and sort of skills development, right? In a lot of instances. So I'm keen to maybe understand, is what Matt's sort of saying, chiming as how it's working, in Oldham? Is it a similar sort of dynamic in terms of professional development? Or have you got any sort of other views on that?
It's similar, but what I tend to find here, whether it's part of the demographic of Oldham, I don't know, there seems to be a wider skills gap between who can do everything and who has very little skill in the digital aspect. So what we try and do is, when we first went digital, we did a phased rollout of all our digital pedagogy. So we had the early adopters, and then we have the people who will learn from them. So I kind of come into the middle of that. So I will help the ones that don't really want to do it or are not confident in doing it. And it's definitely, how can I put this without making it sound quite rude? There's a definite skills gap between people that can't and can effectively, and that is, it seems to be a generation gap, which is the bit I was trying to get around there. It seems to be the people of my age that either don't want to or can't do it, as opposed to the early adopters. So what we've done with our CPD is try and work around that. So we did it in phases. So the people that could do it, teaching the people in their own departments that didn't have quite the skills to match what we were trying to do. So aside from what other people have just said, it is similar, but not quite. So I'd be interested to find out from other areas if it is something similar, or if it's just the demographic of Oldham that's in that way.
Really interesting. Stephen, I'm going to come to you now, but I'm going to sort of add an addendum onto this.
Okay.
Is there an issue in terms of, like, are we speaking the same language? Us as early adopters, those sorts of, we're comfortable and capable in taking on sort of new technologies and approaches and getting to grips with them really quickly. And, our understanding of these like emergent pedagogies and digital approaches for teaching and learning, it seems to be, strong. But is it a question that, towards Phil's point, that there is maybe a generational gap or a skills gap, and actually that we're just not, we're not resonating because we're speaking different languages?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I think if I lead off on kind of my views on the previous one, and then it might lead into that. I mean, I think the method that I've taken, certainly within the last year or so, is I've taken a little bit from sort of your blended or sort of styles of learning and tried to incorporate those a little bit. So I've tried to give anybody that's been trained up on anything an initial injection of training, typically through like short, sharp little videos that basically get them going on whatever it might be. I think particularly because a lot of what we had to deal with early on was getting people up and running on a certain platform, and I think that suited that quite well. Based upon that, using things like Matt mentioned, the use of forms and stuff like that, you can get a bit of a view back about who's actually comfortable with that, just in the way you would with a group of students. Actually, who's got that idea, they're comfortable, who's got some misconceptions or not sure how to deal with things, and then you can get those people on their own for a secondary session and kind of, like I said, take that kind of blended approach, or almost like a flipped approach, I suppose, to how it works. And I've found that quite effective, because you can really narrow down issues, and then you have those one-to-ones or whatever it needs, small group sessions where you can iron out issues or questions or barriers that might have arisen during their first sort of trial of the training. In terms of your question about the sort of the divide that we're seeing, I think it has forced the issue a little bit, hasn't it? Because we've been, our hand has been forced by this situation. Some people could have just ignored the fact they need to investigate, or maybe there wasn't such a need to investigate EdTech. You could just sort of bury your head in the sand and ignore it, but you can't do that anymore. So I think it has forced people to engage with it, and therefore you are seeing a gap that wasn't so obvious there before. I think it very much has depended upon the centre that I've been working with. I mean, I know here, for instance, that we've got a fantastic staff body that will engage with things. You've got enough momentum that snowball just grows, and anybody that is slightly reluctant, you kind of gets involved through the masses of people that want to. But then you have other centres that are far more difficult to engage with. That doesn't give you an answer in terms of how to solve that, but I do agree that there is it has highlighted the issue, I think.
Well, so on that point then, and this is, to go on to the next question, is like, this is almost like a very simple, a loaded question.
Okay.
What's good CPD? What does it amount to?
Okay. So
anybody else want to chip in whilst they're thinking about it? I mean, we're kind of touching on some good practice or emergent practice, and I think post-COVID, there's something around has CPD changed forever? Are we ever going to go back to those sorts of traditional means? Do we want to go back to that? And whatever the answer to that question, what does good look like?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, good CPD should be that is allowing those that are partaking in it to improve their practice. That's very kind of abstract as an answer, but that's probably what it should do. And most of we talk about teaching and learning, won't we? But it should allow them to improve the way they're doing that.
How about Phil or Matt? Have you got any views on that? Excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, I can only agree with that. I mean, good CPD is the end user gets out of it what they require. I mean, you can go overboard with CPD. So you can do a blanket, right? Everybody is going to be taught this, but in actual fact, only half the people need everything. So you can almost flood people with too much information. So as long as that end user gets what they require, I think that is good CPD, whether it'll be a tiny amount or a lot of it.
Matt, I mean, are you, as someone that's part of the PLC, has produced Blended Learning Essentials, which is just a static online course, pretty much. What does good look like?
Yeah, no, I agree with both. I think it's got to be. You've got to aim for people to be walking away with, like Phil said, if it's a little or if it's a lot. And I think that, again, being a teacher at heart, and that's what I'm trained as. As a teacher, I always incorporate that into my training. I think that I'd feel that everyone in that room should walk away with something. And again, it is a really difficult question, because you are going to get those people that walk into a training session automatically negative, because sometimes those are the barriers that people put up. And I think that it's winning those people around, just like your difficult students. You have to gain their trust, they gain a relationship with them, and ultimately set that bar that you're there to support them. And I think you know, encouraging questioning and things like that in those kind of sessions is really important, and make it a kind of, you know, not just a chalk and talk kind of setup where it's interactive and you get people taking part in kind of things is really important, because then they feel valued and they feel like they are taking something away from it.
Absolutely. And listen, I think I can sort of speak on some of these points. So I'm not a traditional educator, so to speak, but I've trained and coached and mentored quite literally hundreds of startup businesses in the EdTech space. And I used to talk quite a lot about this idea of you've got different sort of personas, and you've got to sort of develop value propositions for different personas. And one of these personas is called the Saboteur. And the Saboteur isn't really the person that just wants to blow the project off the rails and doesn't want to do it, but they are the person that's often the least confident or competent user of, you know, whatever your new whiz-bang EdTech is. And my point was always that if you can address their needs head on, and you can satisfy their sort of preconditions and misconceptions and their fears and their anxiety, you overcome that inertia. And in many cases, if you're doing that with the Saboteur, the least confident and competent of users, and you change their mind and mindset, quite often they can become the biggest evangelists and supporters for the approach that's being suggested. I mean, what do we think about that? Have we had any experience? I mean, let's maybe bring it back to the actual demonstrators program. Like in your engagements with schools and the staff there, have you had sort of similar sort of experiences? Have there been those that are kind of resistant, or you know, you've been able to sort of change mindset and their approach and get their, you know, their buy-in from here on in?
Yeah, I don't mind going first on that one, Kriss. I think my experience really is that a lot of the schools and colleges actually undervalue themselves as well. And the great part of this program is being that they're talking to other, like us as a college or schools that's in support with them, but actually they're in a really, really good place, and they're using the technology really well and in a great kind of way. And I think that them hearing that from us as supporters, you know, that's really helped them. I've not experienced any negativity at all, if I'm honest with you, with the 13 that we've supported. I think they've been fantastic, and they're really, you know, engaged and welcoming of that support. And, you know, some need a little bit more than others and a little bit more guidance than others, but I don't think that, you know, they've all been very welcoming about that. And yeah, I would say that it's quite common to see how much they feel they're not on the same page, and actually they really are. In some elements, they're striding ahead more than what we are, you know. And I think that's really good. And again, I think bringing what Stephen said earlier on about being forced into this situation, I think lots of people are panicking about that they should be further along the line than they are. But ultimately, it's a case of holding on a little bit and just not rushing it. I think that's kind of some of the advice that I've been giving out.
And maybe it feels insurmountable, but actually once you start chipping away at it, then actually you realise, or some people realise, that they're actually pretty confident and competent. Stephen, Phil, what are your sort of thoughts on this idea?
Yeah, I mean, I'll pick up on that last point. I think about, I mean, I've had a good number of schools now coming to us. They've signed up to the program, and all they're looking for really is a conversation with a school to see how they measure up a little bit, and they want to know kind of, this is what we're doing, what do you think? And in a lot of those cases, I can start going, you should be doing this job, you know, you should be as a demonstrator school, but you're doing a fantastic job. And I think they just didn't really have the confidence that was their offer really good? And so those were nice, easy ones to support, really, because you just go, yeah, fantastic, you're doing all the right things, and it looks like you've got a lot to offer, actually, not only students but other schools as well.
Is there anything on the other side, like where it has been challenging? And Phil, I mean, feel free to sort of give us your sort of point of view on this as well.
I mean, yeah, I can only agree. I mean, I've had no negatives. There's been trepidation, because people they're being forced into a scenario that they weren't envisaging, or certainly not envisaging in this short time frame. And a lot of it has been positive reinforcement. They're doing it right. They just need somebody to tell them that they're doing it right. And going back to what others have said, they want a benchmark to work out whereabouts they are on the scale. And invariably, they're doing it right. In fact, they're doing it more than right. In some cases, they've done things that I didn't think of, which can be slightly embarrassing when I'm trying to train them, but...
Well, it seems like, you know, to everybody's points, the teachers and schools really want affirmation that the approach that they're taking, or the strides that they're making, are in line with what's kind of expected, right? And I think we have to acknowledge that this thought around what's expected, it's still part of the unknown. I've said this on so many occasions, and I don't mean this quite crassly, but at the moment, not just the EdTech Demonstrators Programme, but all schools around the country are quite literally, in the main, trying to, you know, land the plane whilst building the runway, right? And, you know, there's such an importance of educators being able to sort of use other educators as sounding boards and get, you know, that understanding as to how other people are doing it, even if it's if it feels like it's being held together with sticky tape. And maybe that's one of the real powerful benefits of the demonstrators schools, is that they've moved from the sticky tape approach to just having like kind of fairly solid approaches put in place, and it's about sort of scaffolding teachers' own understanding of how they go from where they are today to where they're going to be over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. I guess one of the questions now I want to talk about is thinking about, you know, the movements going forward. You know, what in terms of sort of pedagogies, are there any sort of new and emergent approaches that you think are more relevant than you know, maybe the status quo, or new things you're trying in your setting that are, you know, beyond obviously what we're just doing in sort of, you know, using BLEs and remote learning platforms? Is there anything that you're trying or you're thinking about trying that, you know, might be interesting and sort of aspirational for our audience today?
Yeah, I don't mind kicking off on this one. I think it's probably worth talking quickly about the sort of support that we're offering. I think very early on in the initial lockdown, most of the support that people were looking for was around that initial training on how to use the platform and just getting it going. Slowly but surely, the questions are changing though, and the conversations I'm having with schools now are more around pedagogy, more and more so, which I think is good. I think they're asking the right questions, and it tells me, or hopefully at least, that schools are getting those initial steps out of the way and getting those technological barriers out of the way, and then we can start thinking about how best to use that. In terms of what I've been suggesting and talking about there, I have been looking at things like blended learning and that sort of style of thing, because I think it fits with it really nicely. I always sort of use myself as an example in terms of what I did during that lockdown with my groups. So I initially tried just a traditional style of teaching, just kind of replicate what I was doing in the classroom, and very, very quickly I found that just didn't work. I found it really clunky. You very quickly sort of realized how much you relied upon seeing those students, seeing their reactions and sort of bouncing off that, and you just didn't really get that anymore. So it didn't really work. So instead I was creating initial injections of sort of lower order thinking skills. So that sort of understanding kind of level of things. They'd watch those, they'd sit some sort of small assessment based upon that, and that then gave me a few groups of students. So I'd have those that got it and brilliant, they should be now being pushed towards higher level things, the nuances of how to answer exam questions, those sort of things. You've got some middling ones, and then you have some that just have massive misconceptions essentially. And then in that maybe hour that we would have had as a live lesson, sort of a live interaction, I was splitting that into groups. So I was inviting some students that just didn't get it, 20 minutes at the start, where we'd go over, these are the misconceptions you had, let's deal with that. At that point, I found them a lot more willing to engage as well, because I found in a big group, when you've got 20, 30 students in this live call, that it was probably quite daunting for them to want to engage there, to unmute their mic and actually put an answer forward, probably for some reason more so than it would be in a class. I think it sort of feels a bit unnatural maybe to do that. But then when you only have 5 of them maybe in that small group, then that becomes far more, I think, or less daunting for them. The other end of the scale, you'd have those, and then you do talk about the nuances, how to get that, turn a 7 into an 8 or an 8 into a 9 if you're doing GCSE work or whatever it might be. And that really allowed it to focus, kind of forced differentiation. I found that was a good approach. I think it worked well.
Great, that's really, really interesting, Stephen. Thank you. What about Matt or Phil? Your sort of views on sort of how pedagogy sort of developed and what you're implementing in your setting?
Yeah, sorry, Phil. Do you want to go first, or me?
No, it's okay. You carry on.
Yeah, I totally agree with Stephen. Actually, yeah, really, really good example. Really, I think that it has changed. I think I'm very much a believer of selling it as especially with online learning and blended learning, that the planning and the delivery doesn't need to change too much. I think that we shouldn't forget that the pedagogy is still there and it needs to be kind of addressed. But I think by the main common problems that we were kind of getting asked was how you can how we would engage the flipped kind of side of the learning. So we would kind of offer some kind of different tools, so things like Wakelets and Padlets and flip grid, things like that. There's kind of break it up a little bit rather than just delivering and trying to do group scenario and group activities.
Can you explain what those are just very quickly?
Of course. So Wakelet is very much a collaboration kind of area where you can kind of build on a bank of resources. So it works quite like a kind of flow, really, where you can find different resources from the internet, PDFs, Word documents, PowerPoints, whatever you kind of come across, and start to kind of build a bit of a kind of a bank of resources, which is really nicely kind of presented. Really good to collaborate on that with students or with teachers. It's a free tool as well, which is fantastic. So yeah, you don't need a paid version or a free version of that. Flipgrid's a kind of video recording kind of collaboration tool. So again, you can kind of work with students or members of staff collaboratively on recording video responses. So again, another way of engaging learners. We teach the kind of Snapchat video kind of generation, so that's quite a nice little tool to use. Good way of gathering like interactive evidence as well. Again, forms, which I've mentioned before, and things like that. Fantastic kind of gauging those kind of starter activities and kind of plenaries and stuff like that. So it's those are the kind of requests that we have been supporting with quite a lot. Just because I think that the traditional teaching would be you have a breakout after kind of 15 20 minutes of theory, and then kind of how you would incorporate those things online, and how you would obviously bring those blended kind of resources in, or those flip resources as well. So yeah, okay. That's kind of what we've been doing.
I'm gonna move on to, because we've only got 5 minutes left. I'm going to move on to one of the last topic areas. Phil, I'm going to come to you first. This I think is very pertinent given the news that we've just seen about Wales and their choice and decision to sort of stop the exams process for this year. So I think when we're thinking about English students, and we've obviously got FE and sort of primary and sort of formal education covered here. What are you guys thinking about in terms of how you're preparing to assess learning, and maybe some of the differences between this year and last year, and any top tips that you've got for educators out there that are thinking about planning for this exam period that we're likely to get into sooner rather than later. Phil, why don't you pick up on
that? I'm going back to last year. What we did initially was, well, apart from wonder what we were going to do, we initially decided that we were going to do a purely assessment classroom based approach. I'm on the fence. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think there's a lot of merit in going for an exam. I can understand the reasons why they're not, but this year there's no decisions, certainly in our college at the moment, as to which way we're going to go. I think we've got some mocks coming up, which are going to go ahead as normal. We've had some GCSEs, which are here, which went ahead as normal. So people came in and sat them, the resits. As for next year, I think we're going to hold on as long as we can, because I would like the exams to be sat as normal. I don't think that doing 2 years worth of a classroom-based assessment is going to really show what a student is capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
What I found is that because of certainly the remote learning aspect, students, believe it or not, they actually crave that one-to-one, and the losing out. And to deny them going for an exam is just going to compound that issue even more.
Mm-hmm.
So from my perspective, I'd like to see the exams, but there's been no decisions made, or none that I've heard around here anyway. I don't know what everybody else thinks about that.
Do you think there's like, I mean, it seems like there's an increasing call for formative assessment to be sort of taken more seriously and become actually part of examining, right? And I guess that's somewhat the case with kind of coursework-ish, e-portfolios-ish. But I just wonder what Matt and Stephen think. I mean, obviously we've got a couple of minutes left, so try and keep it succinct, but I'm keen to get your views.
Are you asking here whether or not we think they should essentially go ahead with exams, or take a sort of, as we've seen recently, the sort of view that Wales have taken?
Well, I think what I'm asking is, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing to prepare for any outcome? And is it just going to be business as usual and the sort of standard approach, or?
Yeah, I think in all the sort of chaotic time that we've had, normality is important, and I think the closer we can get our students to that normality, the better, really. So I think until we get told otherwise, we are attempting to keep things business as usual, keep it going, and if things change, then we'll adapt. And I think that's kind of how I think most centres have been dealing with things. Is things have been quite organic in the way they've had, because they've had to be. You know, like you use the analogy of building the runway as you're trying to land a plane, and I think that's kind of what we're doing at the moment. So you can only do the job that's in front of you, and you do the best job of doing that job that you can, and just try and keep it as normal as for the students as you possibly can do. I think that's what they want as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're trying to do.
That learner-centric perspective is possibly all too easy to get sort of forgotten sometimes, right? Matt, maybe some closing thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that we need to react to what's the right for the centres and for the students, really. I think, if we end up going remotely, I think practice for the students and staff is key. I think that, we shouldn't just be plunging students into these new situations. And again, I think if we keep it traditional, we keep it traditional. I think that the earlier we can kind of make those decisions will be beneficial for everybody. But yeah, as Stephen said, it's ever changing. So just got to try and react to it the best we can and support staff and students through that, really.
Great. Any final top tips for educators that are maybe thinking about how they're getting prepared? And this is the final minute now.
I think we are caught in a very difficult position at the moment where we're between two worlds. I mean, if we all went remote and everybody went remote, and that's the way we were going to do things, then it'd be easy to design CPD and pedagogy around that. But we're not in that situation. We're in these situation where we don't know if we're going to be traditional one week and then remote the next week. And I think it's choosing the right pedagogy to suit your requirements. Don't just jump on blended or flip because you think it's going to be good, because you might end up investing a whole lot of time and teachers' efforts into doing something that actually, 2 weeks later when, a group comes back, that actually isn't then picked up and run with. So it's what's right in one school and one context is not going to work everywhere.
I can just confirm that. Always have a focus. Don't jump on something digital just because it's digital. because you may find out X number of months down the line that that's actually not really what was good for your particular environment. So keep a focus, and if it's not right, it's not right. Don't do it just because it's there. I've seen too many people fall by the wayside with that one.
All right, so where possible, sort of stick to your strengths. Try to have a very secure plan, and maybe relying on what has been current practice up until now, until you're told otherwise. And yeah, there seems to be a lot of positivity for the sort of efforts that's being made in terms of people's appetite to take on new ideas and sort of new training rapidly at pace. Well, guys, listen, I really appreciate, as I'm sure all our audience do, your time and attention and know-how that you've offered here today. I also want to thank, just again, all the educators that have joined us this afternoon and are tuning in as our audience. Obviously, the EdTech Demonstrators Programme is here to support you. Please don't forget that. If you haven't signed up and you are interested in receiving CPD around how to deliver effective online learning for both in-class and remote learning scenarios, then the EdTech Demonstrators Programme is really here to support you with those objectives. But on that note, I'm going to leave it for now, and I hope that you've enjoyed this afternoon. And thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to say goodbye.